Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Zionist AF. So today we are talking with an amazing person, Andrew Cotton, who I'm sure you can tell by looking at all the cool stuff behind him. There's some art involved, guys. Yes, there is. So I met Andrew through the IVC Givarim, Aaron, and then, of course, our funny friend, Mr. Paul Faust. And they are actually who introduced me to some of your art. And then we're going to be able to see more of your art. And of course, all the ways that people can see your art and acquire your art will be posted here on the podcast so that people can go ahead and click right through and get right to you. So without further ado, Andrew, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, well, firstly, I want to just say thank you for the opportunity to come on your podcast and meet you and have a wider conversation. Yeah, I'm from London. I'm 44 years old, and I spent the first 24 years of my life growing up in North London. My dad's from East London, and my family are from Northwest London. And my dad had a printing company where he did block printing and silk screen printing for polyester bags and like paper bags, so like local markets, stores, retail, things like that. So I grew up around my dad, his grandfather was a business owner. So I grew up around, running your own business and really working with your hands, working with graphics, understanding like the commercialization of it. And as a kid, I was always like in his office, drawing, painting, messing. That was just something that ultimately would keep me out of a lot of trouble. So, yeah, I've always had like an affinity to it. And obviously I didn't want to print bags, but I really said, I'm gonna paint, Dad, one day. And he goes, "What? You're gonna paint walls? You're gonna paint homes?" I was like, "No, Dad, I'm gonna paint paintings." And he was like, "All right, son. What kind of artist you gonna be? A con artist?" Like, he came up with
Was your dad a comedian or a printer?
my dad. So my dad is like he came from like a very working class East London. His dad died when he was 15, went straight into the business, and he grew up pretty tough. And he was also old when he had me. He would always tell me, as a kid, when the Germans were dropping bombs on me, we were out in London looking for shrapnel. And my mom came from like a really nice sort of upper middle class background. So I from the beginning, I would live in like a kind of nice suburb in North London. But then on the weekends and like during school holidays, I'd go to East London, which is, I guess, like for New York would be the equivalent of like East New York or Brooklyn or the Lower East Side back in the day before it was gentrified. And you would see like my family over there was a whole different
Right.
world, a lot, way more dangerous, so from an early age, I would just be exposed to these different
Worlds,
environments,
with it, yeah.
and also like Jewish community in North London. Jews typically in London all stick together, whether you're Israeli, Sephardi, religious, secular. Typically,
Right.
it's
Well, it's
safety in
the
numbers.
diaspora Jews, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like safety in numbers. Like they just stay together. So
Yeah.
that was always really interesting to me, just seeing all these different worlds, and just constantly growing up around, like, obviously also East London was like, the capital of like graffiti and a big West Indian community there. It's predominantly like Jewish and West Indian in those neighborhoods. So from like an early age, I was just like captivated from seeing, like graffiti and art everywhere. And just,
So you were seeing like graffiti outside, but you were also seeing like, with what your father did when he was printing, whether it was someone's logo or label, it was still art. Like someone had to create it.
yeah,
So
no,
you had this like mashup.
yeah.
Now, were you like put to work? Did you have like?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that because we're around the same age, and my father owned a business, and he would make us like help, like
Yeah,
what we
well,
could
I
do.
can tell you this, for the first 13 years of my life, just every time, my dad had one employee, he's an English lad called Terry, and Terry would just call me boy. So he would never call me by my name. So for the first like third, all right, boy, load the car, boy, put the. So, and then my mum, who's quite posh, would be like, "Oh, don't speak to him like that. His name's Andrew. All right, boy. All right, Mrs. Cullen." So it was really like very comical growing up, because like it was like a London like a satirical London. My mum trying to like, dot the I's and cross the T's and make me more proper. And my dad was like, fucking get to work. Blah, blah, blah. Come on, son. Look, I load boxes, and he'd take
Boy.
me. Yeah, and and not only that, he taught me, like he would have, load up the van, boy, and we'd go from like different parts of like Dalston to Hackney, going to like the different markets, loading, unloading boxes, and meeting all these different vendors from all different walks of life. Obviously a big Muslim population as well. And back then it wasn't. It was all like your English first, and your religion and your politics is like secondary. So that
But
was
I do
really
think it's interesting because there's a culture within listen, there's European culture, but within Europe there are different countries, right? And the culture within, within England, or is it Great Britain? I don't know, like what, things change all the time. Like, but even like the culture, like, right, even within like, but even within a city, like you were saying, like East London and Northwest London, but like all of that together is so interesting. And it when you're like telling me the story of how this guy was saying, boy, load the car, boy, this, and it wasn't like he was being like it. That's just, I think part of it is a generational thing. Part of it is like, that's just like a cultural thing, whatever. I mean, I remember when I was younger, we had a softball coach who would just always call us "use girls."
Yeah, Jersey.
Instead of, but it was "use," and I was like, that's not grammatically correct. But it was just, but like forever, I'll have that like memory. And it wasn't like a talking down. It is. But I think that this is good, especially when you're growing. And I think that there's so much less of this now, where like you are able to be exposed to all these things, and whether, I mean, yes, your mom was like, no, call him Andrew. His name is Andrew. Right. Like, yeah, I get it. But at the same point, like, it's good to kind of have all this. And I think all of these different influences, it's kind of like it translates well into your story and kind of your, your art. I feel like a lot of people, when you say, oh, I'm an artist, I'm a painter, and I laugh when you're, what are you going to paint, walls? And sometimes I ask people, are you like a canvas painter or a home painter?
And just a caveat to that, like I went to like, I got scholarships to like Central St. Martin's, like really pretty prestigious
like very art.
Like top art schools in the UK, very. And then once I got into them, then my dad and mum, they were like, they kind of backed it. They're like, look, he's this is something that we, like kids growing up in the 90s got in a lot of trouble, so it just kept me out of trouble, and they were like, they totally supported it. And then art school, I did pretty good in art school, and then I think by the time I had graduated, I was like selling pieces to like random different people. But the point is I never really had a plan B with it. When I dropped out of art school, I worked for advertising companies. I did a bit of like sales and things of that nature. And I just hated it. I hated it so much. And in 2003, I met my wife, who's from New York. Like, her dad's from New York, and her mom's from New Jersey. And I met her in London. And then, within a year, moved out there, got married. I also had family in Brooklyn and New York, so I've been exposed to the States and
New
Florida.
York.
Yeah, New York and Florida. I've been exposed to America. I've been coming here since I was a kid. So the minute I met my wife, I was like, great, you're Jewish. Oh, you're a Cohen. I'm a Cohen as well. Because initially my name is Cohen. But so what happened is my grandfather had to change it from Cohen to Cotton, because Churchill, or the government back then, mandated that all the British Jews should change their last name to secular sounding English names, because in case they got invaded by the Germans, they didn't want like all the Jews. So, like,
to be like,
Goldberg would be changed to Gold, and like all the Jews. So originally it was Andrew Cohen, but but my grandfather would say, no, I went into the war fighting the Germans as Cotton, I'll die Cotton. So it became like, and that's why my branding is like 100% Cotton. So it was always like,
I love that.
Like you got it, because the British, for the ups and downs, like the UK was very, very, and since my dad would always say he could trace his lineage back to Oliver Cromwell. So he was very proud that there were Jews, like English Jews, in England since the 16th century. I think that's when it was. You might have to fact check that. But yeah, they were very much a fabric of society. And like the kings and queens consult with rabbis back then when they should. So it was fascinating, to be honest with you. And yeah, growing up in London was a real experience. And Yeah, and also just like not just the graffiti, the darker sides of that aspect. Like unfortunately, even as a kid growing up in London, I remember all the local cemeteries in London. It was a very normal thing where you'd see swastikas on it, and Jewish cemeteries would be smashed. And typically, it was just done by kids. It wasn't like these hateful adult groups. And I hate to get so deep so quickly, but
No, but I do want to kind of say something about that. Like I never understood that, and I do think that that's probably a pretty accurate statement to say that most of that stuff is done by like stupid
yeah,
teenagers. But I have to tell you, Andrew, when I was a kid, I was like terrified of cemeteries. Like 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 they weirded me out, creeped me out. I blame my father actually because when we would go visit like our family members, my father's one of those people that's like a little too comfortable just like having a conversation with someone who's passed. Like
right,
not that
right,
he thinks
yeah.
they're talking back to him or anything, but um and I was just like, this is like uncomfortable. And I mean, I also was too terrified of like doing any I wouldn't do stuff like that, but it's crazy to me that that's like a go-to for teenagers, but I think it's like a go-to. But the other thing I wanted to say, which was interesting, like you mentioned your wife is from New York and you're from London and you're both Cohens, and I was like, wow, well that'd be a lot of pressure for the kids that like covering us, like,
She's a
but
part couple, so she whatever that means. She's a
now
daughter.
and then I wonder what everyone sounds like in your house. Like, do you feel like
American.
you've
No, American. Like, and I'm happy to say I recently got my American citizenship. I was on the
oh well,
fence.
Kolokvod.
Yeah, I was on the fence for a while, but watching like the decline of the UK and constant.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen what's been going on recently, I
Oh
just
yes, yes,
yeah,
yes.
I'm pretty happy to be in the Everglades of South Florida. It seems
Yeah,
to.
it's beautiful down there. So I was just going to say, you guys are smart. You left the Northeast because first of all, it's cold up in the Northeast, and I'm in the Northeast, and also things are not super great. New York is I mean, New York has gone like this over the years. I don't need to tell you that, but it's back in a.
Yeah.
But and New York also has an interesting graffiti scene, and I had met through some other travels Benzi Brofman, who's a pretty well-known Israeli graffiti artist, and just I'm fascinated. And so I started really looking into like the history of graffiti, and I found a documentary about it, and I noticed that it's like this whole idea of like graffiti used to be thought of as just like it was a very different thing, and it was almost like when people were damaging property, right, and just like
Man,
tagging, but
right.
and yeah, and it's yeah, total vandalism. And then now it's, I mean, it's amazing art, and it's almost like it just went to this like total transformation into this acceptance.
Well,
And it's
I can definitely talk to that when you're ready.
yeah, no, and but also like it's interesting how it weaves into not just this idea of outside anymore.
Well, I
And
mean,
like
I want to be clear. Like, I stopped doing anything. I haven't done any graffiti on any walls since I was about 15 because my dad told me if I ever see you destroying someone's property, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. So I stopped doing that. Now, what I did,
consequences. Good job, Dad.
yeah, like early on, I just applied that kind of like aesthetic to canvases. Now, when
Yeah.
I moved to New York in 2004, I remember like walking. I was working actually for my first week in Israel. I'd been civilly married for a week, and I was working for some trying to some sales job for some Israeli company, and they sent me down to West Broadway in Soho in New York, and I was shocked to see like people selling art on the street. Now, at the time, it was all people selling flowers and like, just very sort
Same
of,
old stuff.
yeah. My mind was blown. I was like, what? How are these people selling on the street? So I talked to every single vendor and they said, yeah, First Amendment, freedom of expression. I was like, holy wow, that's amazing. Because obviously in the UK and London, if you were just to set up a table and start selling art in a prominent neighborhood, you're going to be arrested in 3 minutes. So I went home that day and I spoke to my wife. I said, I can't believe it. She goes, oh, yeah, that's a thing. Okay, honey, very supportive, very American. Yeah, go for it. So I bought, a handful of canvases and, the first things I did is I painted all my weird kind of like these nightmarish kind of like paintings, like darker stuff. And I took them out and it wasn't a great day. I had a couple of people stop. And then this Italian guy, he stopped at my table. He's like, wow, very interesting art in broken English. And he said, listen, my friend, I'm an art dealer. one of the things I want to tell you is nobody wants to buy your nightmares. Only a handful of people want to buy your nightmares, your art. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And I was looking around at everything in New York, and I was like, had a table in Soho in front of all, like, graffiti and posters and all kinds of stuff. And so I went home and I just started like cutting stencils and tagging over canvases. And I saw, like, the very next day, I came back with these like 10 canvases and a table, pulled it up from Canal Street. And I saw these kids lining up in front of a shop, and before the shop was open. And I was like, and they all looked like they were waiting for something. So I went and spoke to them, and I said, well, what is it you guys are in line for? They're like, oh, this store called Bathing Ape. And it's a new hot store in New York back then. And it had just opened. And they were spending, I kid you not, $400 in 2003 on a pair of sneakers. My mind went, poof. I had never heard of anything like that growing up in London. So I said, you know what? I'm going to set my table up right here.
Yeah.
So I set it in front of the shop, these kids, and I was selling these little like graffiti paintings for $100. That first day I made $700. And to me, as a 23-year-old, making $700 on the street blew my mind. So for the next 10 years, I was around graffiti artists and selling. I became pretty, not well known, but well known enough where I sold art to like Swiss Beats and rappers and all kinds of different like interesting characters like on the streets of New York. And I had a couple of big graffiti friends being like, well, that's selling out, yada, yada, yada. I was like, you know what? I don't look at it as selling out. I look at it as buying in. And I could always hear like my dad's voice at the back of the head. Listen, you're a good Jewish boy. I work bloody hard to get you into art school. Don't ruin the family name. So I was like, all right, Dad, I work. Right. And it all came back to him because I remember like I treated it like a business. Like you go to the market, you take the boxes, boy, you load up the painting, and so I became like a London, all right, there, get your paintings, 2 for 1, 3 for £1. And I had a lot of fun with it. And then by 2008, I bought, like, that was when the first couple of food trucks were coming out in New York. I bought like from a vendor. I bought a truck. Like, so I turned this truck into a mobile gallery. So I started taking this truck all around New York and Brooklyn, and I did that for about 5 years.
You must have been the only art truck. I've never heard of an art truck.
In London and New York at the time. People have said they'd never seen it before.
That's awesome.
I did it with another friend from London that's come on to be a pretty well-known artist in his own right. And yeah, it was a trip. And I did that for about from selling on the streets and doing the art truck thing. I did that for about 10 years. And then I signed with like major galleries. And this was really all before like social media had even properly kicked off. It was kind of,
right.
Yeah, by the time 2013 had done, I was kind of done with selling art on the street. So it was 10 years of hustling in New York. So this thing when people are like, oh, you want to be an artist, it's like, or an actor or anything like in the creative arts, it is brutal. Like to kind of get that break or that opportunity, it's either you're very well networked or you have an obscene amount of talent and you work hard, and whether it's hard work and skill or mazal or whatever you want to call it. But it's definitely, it was not easy, but I have to be honest, that addiction of like, number one, freedom, and number two, people stopping and like, just like how we're doing now, like, oh, it's good to meet you, and engaging with every people is priceless. And yeah, that's what got me hooked. Just like the freedom.
But I think first and foremost, the fact that your wife was like, go ahead, honey, like, that's awesome. That she's like just a supportive, stellar, awesome. So hi.
She was, and without my wife, like, she would, because any other English girl, they would have been like, what, you're doing something? No, it wouldn't work. And it happened to be that she's an only child. Her dad's a real New Yorker. He's a real character. And they just loved it. Like they really supported it. She's in fundraising and grant writing, and she would, have a job, and she'd see me, at lunchtime and come have a cup of coffee and whatever. But to me, and it's weird. It sounds so cliched, when it was obviously an educated decision to say, you know what, I'm going to go out on the street. And in my mind, I was always like, yeah, just the people that are buying things for a couple of $100 eventually will say, yeah, now he shows with, some pretty well famous artists. And yeah, I always had that. I think you got to really know you can do it, and just
Mhm.
kind of and looking back on it, like, yeah, it was brutal, but like it really was some of the best times. And
But again, I think you know the fact that you talk about how your dad had this business, and while you had to learn, like, and you were hustling then, like you had to like help out, and that's a very normal thing, family businesses. So you're able to have like that sort of influence without even knowing it's influencing you, but you were always still able to, like you said, like futz around and experiment and stuff, and you realized this was something you were really good at. And the fact that when you were out on the street that you had, and by the way, that art dealer is probably the smartest art dealer ever, because he's not just in galleries, he's out on the street like looking
oh
at
yeah,
new talent. And what he said to you, because art is an expression of
correct.
the person who creates it, but also it's speaking to the people who are looking at it and or acquiring it, and it may not always be the exact same message, but it's like, and I think that that's what's so fascinating about art, whether it's photography or even digital art or any kind of art, like anything at all. It's so interesting to me because like what one person sees isn't always what the same person sees, and so that in and of itself is especially when you're doing this like for a living is a
Yeah,
somewhat tricky.
100%. And I'm
Yeah.
not, I've got this, like, I can hear it. I always cut people off. It's a bad habit.
No,
I
no,
try.
no. Listen, remember, we're Zionist AF. We have a lot of Israelis on here all the time, and
Yeah,
I remind our listeners, and most of them already know that
yeah,
when you talk over people,
yeah.
when you're both passionate about something and you're into the
Yeah, that's it.
exactly, it's not like it's not like I'm cutting you off and redirecting the
No,
conversation
no,
another
it's
way
exactly. It's
because
just
we're so
layering on to what you
excited.
said. Correct. I'm just
Exactly.
layering on to what you say, and the advice that he gave me, it really, what he said is, and not only that, he became my first major art dealer. He That day he bought all my weird stuff, and then he showed my work in Milan and like weird, very early on in my career. And what
I
he
like
said,
how you call it weird.
yeah,
My weird.
it was all like nightmare. It was like dark stuff, and
Well,
he
Tim Burton made a whole career off the whole dark stuff.
yeah. But it worked out because he said, "Listen," he goes, "figure out a way to become a full-time working artist. You're already on the street. You're already speaking to people. That's great. To do that,
And you
but
have those skills to like, you were smart enough to like, okay, what's going on over here? Okay, maybe
right,
I have to
and
adapt.
you see like tastes and colors because you're in New York. You're seeing it all as a kid and you're absorbing it. And then basically like that allowed me, like, for like every 8 paintings of like commercial things I sold, it allowed me to do the art that I want to do. And honestly, to this very day, it's the same situation where it was like the advice he gave me, which was like I would take, portraits of, like, I don't know, like famous people like this one, or like
Mm.
the Biggie Smalls piece back here. Take
Oh, biggie, biggie, biggie.
Yeah, like
I bet
being
that's a very popular look, that one. Now, I on Instagram, which we will put the link up in the Andrew Cotton Instagram page, there's a Wonder Woman piece, but it's not like the typical
well, I
Wonder
just wanted,
Woman.
I just wanted to end the conversation on by saying, for every
No, yeah.
commercial piece that you do, it allows you to then not only to make a livelihood and still kind of like portray things in an interesting way. And that became the commercial work, and the advice he gave me is the stuff that got me into galleries. That was the stuff
Yeah.
that ended up being my bread and butter. That was the stuff that ended up sort of allowing me to work full time as an artist. It paid for the art. So it wasn't essentially like a joke art, but it was like
No,
you kind
it
of,
was
in a way, you
designed.
kind of have to dumb it down a little bit for your audience. I would always call it not low hanging fruit, but more accessible work. Do you
Well,
know what
I
I
think,
mean?
appealing to
Mass
most
appeal,
people.
mass appeal. That's what it was. It was mass appeal, and then from that gave me, as like, oh, cool. Now I can sell X amount of paintings on the week. I can pay for my art studio, and then I can work on paintings that are like either more personal, and that what led me onto like more Judaic work, or
Mhm.
things that weren't such an easy, initially just like an easy sell. So, and honestly, I'm just going to end on that, and then I'm done. Is like, so from that advice, it was like, all right, well, now I understand, and that work is what got me into galleries. And to this day, it's like the galleries, because they are also businesses, want to take commercial, not like work that sells. And I get it,
Right.
it's business, and
Yeah.
I don't have I'm not a sensitive artist, as you might tell. I have no, that was coming again, being called boy for the first 13 years of my life and being pushed around in Leighton and Dalston. Like, I don't have any, like, I'm just happy to be able to do the thing. Like, I'm not like that attached to the art per se. Like, I'm happy whether to the same day, if somebody stops on the street and they're like, oh, I like it. How much is it? Well, whatever you can. To this day, I'm just happy to be able to do the thing. It was never really, and just to being able to make money and do it, and obviously now full time for over 20 years, just that is a blessing in itself. And that advice was like, do the things you love. Sometimes you're going to have to make a bit of a compromise, but do you know what I mean? Like, I'm very happy with how things have turned out, and thankfully I work with galleries and art dealers that who support my career and the vision that I'm also interested in doing. Like, I did this piece, which is like slightly these 6 kind of like characters, which are kind of, yeah. I don't know if I lost you.
No, it's very interesting. The other thing is, I think the other piece I don't want to at all forget to make sure that we share is that I think because you've been able to take, this advice or constructive criticism or whatever, or guidance or whatever you want to call it, in your life, that you're also, with the fact that you're doing this, personally, professionally, this is your livelihood. You're also, you've committed to, some of the art that you're producing and selling. You are donating a portion to a nonprofit that we both know, the IVC, the Israeli Veterans Club, and I mean, just because, yes, unfortunately, things take money.
This is the original piece that I did, and it's obviously a fist, and it says "Am Yisrael Chai" on it. I've always been doing Jewish art. I've always been a proud Jew, regardless of your religious or Zionist persuasions. You are who you are. My dad would tell me you're a Cohen, so you're a minority of a minority, and also, like, my experience. I had family, that were killed in the Holocaust, and the experience of being a Jew in London was, they let you know you're not English real quick. And yeah, so I know firsthand that Jewish people 100% need a homeland. We need it's Jews have been in that part of the world for thousands of years. How it became a state is up for debate, but we're dealing with it now, and Jewish people need a home. And I spent a lot of time in Israel and actually got kicked out of basic training for getting into a fight with my CEO, the commanding officer, because I'm English.
Andrew, that's just so shocking, because you're so rigid.
Like, he got in my face. I told him, please don't get in my face, and that was it. And so,
I feel like that story could be a podcast in and of itself.
That's the whole, I was in kibbutz Yot Vatar, and I did Ulpan, and then they were getting ready for, this was after 9/11. Whatever, long story. I've got family in Israel. I have a big connection to Israel, and growing up as a kid, my dad would always bring these like wounded soldiers. They would stay at our house. Like, I remember, like, as a kid, we had like a young guy who was like hit in a tank, and he lived with us for like 6 months, and his face was all, like, disformed and that was also, like, I think somewhere that got burnt in my head of the split portrait. Like, half his face was good, and the other side of his face was all disfigured and disformed.
And is that what drew you to the Israeli Veterans Club to support veterans?
Right now, just to be honest with you, I just thought about this talking. But as a kid, I remember, like, I would see his face the whole time, and my dad would always be like, "Oh, it's his war wound. He's a fucking hero." And so,
and your dad was right.
So, like, yeah, the affinity to any of these young boys that go off to fight and serve, you're supporting
the community that's there for them when they return, and because with everything that happened, and that I don't want that to be the focus of this podcast. I want it to be about the art, but because when people return, and no matter what country you live in or what war you serve in, let's be honest, we don't do enough for veterans. Period. Not America, not nowhere in Europe, nowhere. Okay, like, that's the God's honest truth. But because of that, and especially for those who immediately reported for Miluim, for reserve duty, and went back to Israel, but then returned to, now we're going to talk just about South Florida, because that's where the Israeli Veterans Club, Florida, and they're starting in Florida and hoping to grow. And we just had them on the podcast, so we'll leave that with them. But Aaron said, "I know I'm not alone. I can't be the only one." And he was like, okay, I'm having a hard time, so I'm going to see if there's other people. And then they've been able to do this, and they have, therapy and equestrian therapy and water sports and therapists and comedians and everything to come in to really give these people a sense of community. And I think, again, you've been talking about this a community that you were part of, both growing up within London. You were part of like the background of your mother, the background of your father, but still this part of a Jewish community. And then again, like you're part of an art community within that area of New York and all of that, but being a community.
And just to jump in on that, and I think, I'm 44, I'm actually expecting a baby, this week. Yeah. And surprise miracle. But
Don't come while we're doing the podcast.
Right. I think, watching what's happened in the past 9 months, I think it's hard not to have an element of like guilt. I've got a lot of friends in Israel. I have a lot of friends that have gone over to Israel to fight and to serve. Unfortunately, we know a lot of people that have not made it, and like horrific stories. Mm-hmm. And there's an element of guilt, like especially as a man, you think, well, fuck, like what should I be doing? And my wife, the first thing she said is, I'm taking your passport, because she was like, no. She was like, I also went, because I was not, and I also got kicked out of that school as well. I went to like an English boys kind of military boys school, and the thing was, like, you feel kind of guilty because when it's an attack on the Jewish people, it does feel personal. It feels family. It's like, what, you took women, like there's that thing with red hot Jewish men where it's like, no, like you. And so there's that element of like, obviously we give tzedakah, we give money where we can. I amped the Jewish voice is like, yeah, you might get banned or cancelled, but that I've already been cancelled before on Instagram. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're going to continue to like, talk your truth, and I think, yes, I think we have to contribute, whether it's doing a podcast, whether it's making art, whether it's, working.
It's a Tikkun Olam lifestyle.
Yeah. It's one of the, I do that painting a lot. It's like, how do we as a Jewish people, how do we use the resources that God has given us to obviously somehow continue to echo this message that, look,
I think you're 100% spot on. Like, how do we use what we have? And I think, Andrew, that's literally like the most perfect way to say it. Mm-hmm. And, it's like those of us who can, are speaking of, and I think, and like, I feel privileged when I am able to find other people and show people what they are doing. Like, if it brings me like so much happiness, because I'm able to do that. And the thing is, the art that you have created now, again, I want to get back to how the fact that you're, donating a portion of that proceeds, but you've also done art and it's hanging in the physical space. They call it their clubhouse, though it's actually like a home. There's some hanging in there that you created, but in addition, some of the pieces, like you're saying, the proceeds are, a portion of it are being donated to help. So it's a continued way to help so that people. And the other thing is, I think that what helps people, and when they want to be involved, and almost like in the long run, when, let's say, like, someone buys one of those pieces and they know that a portion of that goes to them, every time they look at that piece, they're reminded not only that you created it and it's like so freaking cool, and they get to look at it and enjoy it, but it's also the enjoyment of knowing what it.
100%. Listen, look, Jews give tzedakah no matter what. Like, I've thankfully been blessed enough in my career to be able to make a pretty good livelihood with my art. And I've always donated work, synagogues, charities, Jewish and non-Jewish, like to organizations where, my wife, I told you, she's philanthropic. She works for NGOs. So they're always doing fundraisers. And it was always like, can you donate this piece? Can you donate that? So we have an original piece. Proceeds of the original will be going towards that. And we also have a print collection. And, very soon we're getting a bunch of them, framed up. And I want, we're going to do 3 embellished pieces, hand done. And it's not just a percentage of the prints are going to be going to that organization, but we want the entire proceeds of these pieces that sold can go. So you get to own an original or a limited edition original piece of art, and knowing that the proceeds are going towards, young boys and
still continuing
and
to
young
help.
men. There's a need there, and like, I know you have to pick like these different organizations. I did Friends of IDF. We did a big fundraiser in last December. We did a thing called Art for Peace, and I did it with a lady.
Cool.
and they in Miami, and they raised a lot of money. But then you also start to realize there's a lot of more individual, smaller organizations. What I'm getting from like friends in Israel and listening to other people, it's like, hold on, they don't like one of my buddies. He's going back to Gaza, and he's a dad. He's got 4 kids. He's a couple years younger than me, and he's telling me they literally don't have like, which is shocking to me. I was like, they don't have basic supplies. Like he's like, yeah, I don't have.
Well, I mean, think about it. The mobilization was beyond what anyone could think of. And like there are other, like you said, there are a lot of places. Like there's Unit 11741 out in New York. Daniel Mayil, he is a Gever of Gevers.
Okay.
He has done like I don't understand, because he also has, I think he just had his like 3rd or 4th child, or maybe she's still pregnant. I don't know, because his wife is so tiny, and when I saw her, I wasn't sure how far along she was. But like he doesn't sleep because he works his full-time job, and then he is constantly raising money and then acquiring whatever things and sending them over in just the most speedy manner. And so a huge kol hakavod and a toda rabah to him, because he's doing such great work. And one of the things that I've been committed to since then is finding a lot of grassroots things on the ground, helping people get things, whether one of my friends who's a food blogger was feeding soldiers, and all these things. And there are so many ways to help, and people can always, and they know that our podcast listeners know that they can always ask me, because if there's something specific, right. And also Swords of Iron volunteers with my dear, amazing friend Yocheved. She is a 20-something-year-old who literally dropped everything, got out of her lease, sold stuff, donated stuff, and went over to Israel because her brother's a lone soldier. And she has been nonstop helping organize time, like places and items and ways for people to volunteer or get goods or whatever, and get them to people who are needing. Like she's the one who's primarily running some of the stuff at the Bibas family farm. I mean, it's just amazing. And I think that even out of the darkness, and I kind of want to like say this because I feel like when you're talking about your nightmares of the art, out of the darkness, a lot of beautiful light shines. And or who came on with Aaron from IVC had said, out of like the destruction, these beautiful heroes were born. And I think that there is this opportunity. And I think with the other thing about your art, whether it's a print or an original piece, is that it can become something that is passed down. Like it's either a meaningful piece in like a nonprofit or a hospital or a school or whatever, or just some family home, and like that, it becomes a part of their story. So what you're creating, and and again, people can find your stuff. We're putting all of the ways for people to view what's available and all that stuff. But like, I do think it's really special, and I mean, I'm very envious because I have zero artistic talent. Though in grade school, I thought I could draw very well. I want you to know that. I thought I was like so talented because I had this very supportive art teacher in elementary school who always told all of us how beautiful our work was.
I mean, just to echo what you were saying, like, there is an element of you need darkness so the light can shine, but that battle between destruction and creativity, whether it's on an artistic level or a universal level, is very, very high. Like that, it's such a fine line between, destroying. And here's the thing: I think it unfortunately it's really, really easy to rip and tear things down and to destroy things. To build a nation, to build a people, to hold a family together, to preserve something is worth fighting for, because even if it sometimes does feel like the whole world is like, look, I'm the first to say, look, Jewish people are like any other group of people. You've got good people and bad people in all cultures and all religions. That being said, like Jewish people are still here, and mathematically, I just don't think we should be. And something is happening, and the destruction leads to another form of creation, and they are like layers. And a lot of the work I do is like building up layers where it's almost it is, things are almost like shredded, and it's like the peeling of the skin. Do you know what I mean? And I remember like listening to a rabbi when I was younger. He was like, it's almost like, it's a sacrifice. When you go to the altar, and you give these offerings, like it sounds really dark to say it, but like, they're literally offering up their lives for a future generation. And so, however, Jewish people, secular, religious, Zionist or not Zionist, Jewish or not Jewish, Jewish people need a homeland. History has taught us
Well,
that.
this is a humanity issue at this point, but
Well, history has also told us we're always guests. My dad would always say, "Yeah, we're English, but like you never know when the tables can, and I think, I'd been saying that to like friends in New York and New Jersey. I remember in like 2016, because for me, growing up in London, what's happening now in New York and the colleges and the university, it's just like watching a bad movie for the second time. Because I grew up with
yeah,
it in
yeah,
London. That was just standard, like
right. It's like America. There's been a warning light for
right.
how long?
And like you would hear it, like you would hear in Israel, you Israelis would be like, "Listen, let me." One day they'll find out, and it was the same in London and Europe. In
That
Europe,
was a
they're
good accent.
like,
That was a
"Listen, let me say no." But listen, like, they have a lot of Israeli friends, so like it would be in Israel they would talk about, look, one day Europe are going to feel what we feel, and guess what? What
good.
happens in the Middle East comes to Europe, because when you invade,
It's moving west.
yeah, and it came to
The
Europe,
sun
and
rises in the east and sets in the west.
right, and we would experience, and I'd sit there in Teaneck, New Jersey, which is where I lived for a long time, and I tell my friends who were very progressive, I say, listen, like I'm telling you, like things can get bad real quick, and I remember, like, this was before the pandemic. It was like like they built a Muslim youth center in front of my house, and like the next day there was a Shabbat. Put it bluntly, I had a confrontation with the guys in front of me, not because they were Muslim, because of just like complete lack of respect for the rest of the community.
Right.
And honestly, like, yeah, and the things growing up in London, like I saw horrific stuff at an early age. It just gave me a sense of trauma. I was like, I personally, I want to live in peace. I've got a family. I want to choose a life of peace. I want to choose a life of creation. Tikkun Olam, trying to achieve good things, and yeah, it's sad that the world requires so much, like death cults, really.
Yeah, or it's like again, it's history repeating itself. It's like, when will we ever learn? But the thing is, I want I think, what you just said was such a great, like kind of like bringing it all back. Like, look, you want to live in peace. We want to live in peace. We want to support one another and be human, right? You
Or
should
stay
give.
human. What I did a painting called "Stay Human," not just be human.
Oh,
There's human
stay
being.
human.
There's
I'm gonna
human.
go. I'm gonna go online and look for that one. I want to see. I want
There's
to see it.
human being and human doing. You know what I mean? Are you a human
Wait,
being?
I'm sorry. Say that again, because that is one of the things I'm going to be clipping, because I love when people say these amazing things, and I like to repeat them back to them,
Yeah.
because sometimes you say things and you don't realize how amazing it is or
Right.
how
No,
impactful it
see,
is.
I mean, what there's human being, like you're being at one, and there's human doing. So sometimes we're not sure what humans are doing. Like we're doing things out of rage, out of fear, out of the goodness
Yes.
of our heart. And sometimes I'm a big believer in just being a human being and just trying to be in peace, trying to, like, I understand. I grew up with a lot of like different Muslim cultures, from
Yeah.
Somalia, from Yemen, from countries in
Sure.
Afghanistan, and ultimately, like 90%, we all want the same thing. We want to go to bed at night. We want to provide for our children. We want to be able to
You want to
live.
have a life. Yeah. You want to
People
just
want
have a
to be,
life.
people
Life.
want to be, no, they want to be human beings, and the doing and the actions
Mm.
and the politics and the war is, unfortunately,
Yeah.
things get pushed down our throats, and human beings are now become human doing, and they're
Yeah.
just reacting to these really horrific situations. And
Yeah. Now,
yeah,
I know that, like, again, behind you, you're in your studio, and there's a few different things, and I was wondering. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be like too hard, but I was wondering if you were able to tilt to
yeah,
show us just a few things,
it's a little bit chaotic. So I
or
turned in
just pick one or two. I thought like that might be really cool.
this is the what this is the first one was the Judaic
Okay.
piece. I don't know if it's backwards now, because I think it is, because it's a camera.
Yeah, that's okay though, because people can also see this on the Instagram and know how to find them. But
This
that is,
this
yeah, that's one of my.
that the star piece was one of the pieces I did for Paul.
Yes,
He
I've seen that and I love that.
Yeah, he had that tattooed on his head, on his foot, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna make that into a painting, because
Sometimes. I like
And
how you're like his head. I mean his foot.
I mean, don't
Is that
touch.
a statement about? No, I'm just kidding. We're
No,
kidding. We
no,
love you, Paul. We love you. We love you.
we can edit that bit out.
No, no,
And
no. He would say, "Don't you dare."
so that became like a series where I did it like because obviously there are Jews in diaspora like everywhere. So
Yeah.
I did the Magen David, the Star of David, and I did whether you're a proud American Jew. And here's the thing, like politically, I think people have this issue where that you have dual allegiance, and this is like the very strokes of like anti-Semitism, which I struggle with because I'm a real proud American, and I have a lot of like veteran American non-Jewish friends, and
Mm-hmm.
I've told them, I said, I'm not going back to England until the king sorts the country out. I would not go to Israel unless aliens or the Messiah comes. Like I barely leave South Florida, and here's the thing: I believe you can be a really proud Jew and a proud Englishman. I think you can be a really proud American and a proud Jew. Wherever Jews are in diaspora, we've added something to society. It doesn't mean because you still support and love the state of Israel, it makes you like, you have a different allegiance. And that really bothers me. So that was like,
Mm,
when I saw the tattoo, I was like, no, like I'm continually, I pledge my allegiance to the United States of America, not to the UK anymore. And
mm.
and God forbid it ever got to the point where Jews, no, I would stay here, and to the point that we were not welcome. But as long as Jews are welcome through history, I think we continue to offer huge amounts of not all. I'm not saying there aren't elements
No,
of
listen.
like
There's
culture,
there's good and there's bad everywhere. But I think that
entertainment and music. Like I can't speak for the entire people, but like I can say that I can
that
say
would be
that
so much pressure.
yeah, it'd be a lot of pressure, but I would definitely like to think like your voice is like, especially in these times, if you're living in diaspora, whether you're
Hmm.
in Paris or in Canada, where Jews are starting to feel like shit, I'm not safe in a country that was always very tolerant
Right. Yeah.
and super
That
like
is a very, very scary place to be when you don't feel safe. And just yesterday I was contacted by a friend whose friend's daughter was at I won't say which university in New York out of just concern for her
yeah,
safety,
yeah,
but she was so scared, locked in her dorm room in New York City at a university there, crying and so scared because they were literally like
that's
outside.
madness.
And the
Madness.
fact that this young woman is like so scared and can't even leave her dorm room, the fact that any like if it were about like a different race and they were like we're gonna god forbid do the type of horrific things that
Yeah,
happened in this country like in the South
100%.
before in segregation and all those dark times when there literally were signs above the door like colored or black only, white only, like what I to me in my brain, and obviously I'm not old enough to have lived during that time. It's like I'm like I don't even like understand how that was.
Again, I
I
think
don't but again I
it's
don't understand it. But it's happening again, and
yeah.
it's like people again.
But
We don't have to
I
get into all
can't
that.
interrupt you. It's happening
Oh yeah,
again. It's happening now, really, for the first time. I mean, it happened in America, just around or before the Second World War. It's happening again now in America because it's obvious. Like I said, what happens in the Middle East comes to Europe and eventually will come to America. And
yes,
now it's knocking on your doors. And let me be clear, like when you've got like pro-Palestinian marches in London, they are very different from the affluent and the disenfranchised people in America and the colleges. Like when I told you my dad's from East London, like they had their job as like East London boys was like to make sure they kept the community safe. So when they had right-wing fascists that would come marching through their neighborhood back in the day, well, the Jewish and all my dad's Jamaican friends, they had an alliance. Do you know what I mean? And like,
yeah,
yeah, like, and it was
yeah. We
violent.
got yeah.
No. We
Listen,
grew up. We in London. I just want to finish. Like, we
yeah,
grew up in violence. My dad would always say, "You never tuck your Star of David in." If somebody, and growing up in the UK, we would always, I'd always be walking the streets with like, well, there's always like minimum of six or three, sometimes like 10 or 15 of us. And I remember, I remember that when we had Muslim kids, like radical Muslim kids, come into our neighborhoods as kids. Is this good to talk about or not?
yeah.
I don't know.
You can say
Yeah,
it.
and you can edit it out, but they came into our neighborhoods. They were looking for fights, and I remember like we were told, all right, lads, everyone go buy cheap beer bottles because it's haram. They're not allowed to drink alcohol. And they'll come into our neighborhood. The first thing we do is everyone starts throwing beer bottles at them. And then you'd go out with it was violent. So it was from an early age, we saw horrific acts. And this is also why I think I don't, and this is why I have an affinity because whatever my experience was, is nothing compared to the experience that these boys and young men are going through in Israel. Because I saw some dark stuff in London, but I can only imagine what you do when you're 21 years old and you're being sent into Jenin or Ramallah or any of these places. I mean, it gives me anxiety thinking about it.
And it's not a political statement, but even if you're a 20-year-old young man or woman, which you're a young adult, but let's say there's a 10-year-old throwing Molotov cocktails at you and saying, "I want to kill you." That's not a great place either. And just because that's a 10-year, do you see what I'm saying? So I understand what you're saying, and that when someone is that hell bent on, and what did those people want to have tea with you?
No.
They wanted to hurt you, so listen. It's fine to stand up for yourself, and there's a lot of ways to do that, and some of it is vocally saying, "I am a Jew, I am a Zionist, I am not afraid." So look, like you said, Andrew, you are expressing yourself. You are an artist, so you are expressing yourself through art. I am someone who basically communicates for a living. So, and because I'm out here publicly. I have I have so much Judaica on, it's, and everyone's like, I don't think you have enough. All of this is Israeli silver. This is part of my expression. And by the way, I love jewelry because it's another form of art. And it's so beautiful. But I've also dyed my hair blue. It's fading, but we'll have to re-blue it. And I'll see you another time when it's back into its, full on blue. But because I've doubled down, tripled down, quadrupled down, but not everyone has to do that way. You are able to express yourself, and you've said I've always kind of sort of painted certain Judaica things or created, because it's part of you. It's part of you. So you are using that, and then people can do that, because what you're doing and what I am doing is a way of light. It is a tikkun olam lifestyle type thing. We are taking things that are important to us, a piece of us, and expressing that in a positive way. And look, even if not people are going to go and look at the site and see and is everyone going to totally, I don't know, understand or like everything that you've created? No, because that would be weird. Nobody ever likes anything. But I think that there are certain pieces that will speak to people deeply. And when we spoke just before we came on the podcast briefly, I was like, wow, there's so many of your pieces that that have given me more questions. And it's I really appreciate and I'm interested in them. I don't necessarily know that. And I asked you, is that I've asked did you mean to express this with this? And I don't even want to put it out necessarily on the podcast, because I don't want to alter someone's view of your art, because it was my understanding of it. But I think that's so interesting. So I want people to know that yes, there's some stuff behind Andrew, and we were able to see some of it. But if you want to see more of his pieces, all you have to do is, click on any of the links that we're putting right up here in the podcast. And then, of course, it'll show you how to buy them, how to get it. You don't have to live in South Florida. You will.
99.9% of my work is through galleries, and art dealers. They take everything I make gets made and then sent to galleries in South Florida, in Naples, in New York, and internationally. But the best way to see the work and to get a sense of it is pretty much, as long as they continue to let me to talk and show my work, is on Instagram. That.
Perfect.
That's
well, then we'll include whatever you tell me to include.
Probably. Even and again, that's another conversation as well, because I did wake up in 2019 and my Instagram account, which I had for 10 years with a big following, just disappeared. And I think whether you're being a proud part of your culture and you're saying, I'm not pro, war and annihilation of people, but I am pro. It's what are you for, not what are you against? I'm for the state of Israel. I'm against, civilians and children being killed. I think most human beings are, and casualties of war are brutal on either side.
Right.
There's no doubt about that. And at the same time, it's you say the things that you are for, and I think we're all so scared to speak our truth, because we never know which is a safe platform as a podcaster, as an artist. Like,
sure. I mean, yes, that's
freedom,
the question. Being censored.
right now, yeah, it's like a digital dictatorship. We don't really know. We just don't know, like, at what we're living in an Orwellian time where it's like, am I going to
1984? Oh my God, I remember reading that book.
That's
Wow.
what it is. It's like what, and like the
is.
UK, London was always like that. It was like, well, you have, the speech police and the political. It's become so out of control that now that we are all, and me, I think all the cool kids get banned at some point. I think if you haven't been banned and you haven't been deleted, then you haven't really said anything of any real value.
Well,
You know what I mean?
Andrew, I have no doubt that you will continue to push the envelope in one way or another, because I think that that's part of like being able to express yourself in that way in art. And the thing is, Andrew, I could spend hours and hours and hours talking about your art because it's so diverse and so intense and so interesting. But what I really want people to know is, like, if they have questions, of course you guys can always ask me and I will direct them to Andrew. But on the podcast, we will put, and through his Instagram, you can message and ask, these questions like, oh, I really like this. Can I get this and this? Or, oh, like whatever it is, like, please go ahead and reach out, because the best way to learn and to grow and to, just better yourself, right, is by learning and meeting new people and seeing new things. And I think, the art is the perfect way. So that being said, I want to make sure everyone is able to see the art. If you're interested specifically also in what Andrew is doing, in a cooperation way with IVC, the Israeli Veterans Club, you can reach out to Aaron through IVC. You can reach out to Andrew. But you can also reach out to me. I mean, I always love hearing from everybody. So all of that being said, I almost feel like I also know that with everything you have going on and with your wife expecting, and I don't share people's information, but you did say at the beginning of the podcast, I want to make sure you get back to her. So thank you so much for also inviting us into your space, because where you work and create is a sacred space. And so thank you for allowing us to talk to you in that space. And it also is great because I feel like that's the best place to talk to you, because it's where you're doing your stuff. Yep. So thank you for letting us in on, part of this, also sharing your story, because it's a very interesting story. And you know what, boy, I'm just kidding. That's one of the best. I love this story. But again, use girls, all of yous out there. And again, I'm not making fun of him at all. It's like, it's actually like this very sweet memory. And it's a piece of something that added to who I am and added to who you are. And I think that's what makes people so interesting. And so I really deeply thank you. I'm so glad that, our Zionist AF family, our mishpacha, has been able to see your stuff. And I hope that you continue to grow. And I hope that when I'm in South Florida, I can, come maybe like look at some of the stuff even more close. And then, of course, maybe even meet this new member of the family, but on time. All in due time. Thank you so much. And like I said, all of the ways to contact Andrew will be up on the podcast.